Yes. Attila Melegh, very nice meeting you. Okay.
Das ist jetzt schon an.
University of Economics and Business. Andreas Novi. Visiting professorship, I want to welcome especially our visiting professor Attila Melegh, and I think he deserves more than one applause. And so let's start with the first one. As I said, my name is Andreas Novi. I'm head of the Institute of Multi-Level Governance and Development and president of the International Karl Polányi Society. And in these two functions, together with colleagues from the University of Vienna, the Central European University, we are organizing this visiting professorships now since 4 years. We always kind of embedded in a formal setting, and that's why we have opening welcome speeches by the representatives of the 3 universities and institutions. This will be in the order of my short description. First, Margarete Rammersdorfer. She is Vice Rector at our university here, the Vienna University of Economics and Business. Then Bernhard Kittel from the University of Vienna, Professor of Sociology and head of the Institute of Economic Sociology at this university. Then followed by Carsten Schneider from the Central European University. He is currently pro-rector and professor for external relations and professor of political science. And finally, Markus Lampe, head of the Department of Socioeconomics at WU Vienna. So please, Margarete Rammersdorfer, your welcome words.
Thanks a lot. We did a lot of jokes because of the micro and the size of all of us. So good evening and a very warm welcome from my side. My name is Margarete Rammersdorfer and I'm the Vice Rector for Academic Programs and Students Affairs here at WU. For me, it's a great pleasure to see many of you here today at WU Vienna for what promises to be an enlightened and thought-provoking event. First and foremost, let me allow to extend a special welcome to our distinguished guests, colleagues, and students. We are really honored to have you join us for the public lecture by the 7th Vienna Karl Polanyi visiting professor, who at the same time is also a WU visiting professor, Attila Melegh, on the timely and critical topic of balancing the imbalanced. Our campus here at WU is not just a place for academic pursuit, it's a vibrant hub for sharing and exchanging ideas, innovation and collaborations. Nested in the heart of Vienna, our university between WU, the Central European University CEU, and the University of Vienna, and strengthens teaching cooperations at the doctoral level. Such partnerships are vital in enriching our academic discourse and broadening our perspectives. WU is very pleased that this visiting professorship contributes to WU teaching via PhD courses, submission activity via public lectures, and also scientific exchange through workshops. The topic of today's lecture, Balancing the Imbalanced, is particularly relevant to our current global context. Professor Attila Melegh's insights promise to offer an interesting lecture on the contradiction of migration policy. Thank you all for being here today, and I now invite Bernhard Kittel to the floor for his welcome.
So, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good to have you here. My role is to briefly introduce you to the history of our guest professorship. It's been a couple of years ago that I approached the Chamber of Labor with the idea of having a bit of a counterweight to the other guest professors that we have at the Faculty of Business, Economics and Statistics of the University of Vienna. And they thought it's a good idea, but it should be enlarged a bit, and it should be made a venue of cooperation and discussion among the University of Vienna. And eventually, the Chamber of Labor and the City of Vienna co-finance this visiting professorship. So the summer term is at the WU, and the winter term is at the University of Vienna. We are particularly happy to be able to name it after Karl Polanyi, because Karl Polanyi has been an extremely important person in the interdisciplinary discourse. People like me, economic sociology, economic history, political science, but also anthropology, all profit from his insights. Ideas like embeddedness or the idea of counter movements all have been coined by him and are still used as concepts that direct our research. And I'm also particularly happy to cooperate with the Wiener Volkshochschule because at the time when Karl Polanyi was in Vienna, the University of Vienna was captured by right-wing professors, and actually the only approach to critical thinking, even the Wiener Kreis, was to give lectures at the Wiener Volkshochschule. And so we kind of resumed that, but now with having critical thinking also involved in all three universities. But approaching a wider public, the Wiener Volkshochschule is an important element of our cooperation. So we had very distinguished people here, starting with Nancy Fraser in 21, but I won't name all of them now. We have Attila Melegh now here, and I'm grateful for your presence. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. I wanted to first express my thanks for having us here, so having me here and having Central European University here in Vienna. I remember in the year, I mean, you roughly know about the history, we were based in Budapest for 20 years and then had to move. And when it was clear that we moved to Vienna, I came over and met my old friend with whom I have a long history, Bernhard Kittel, and he mentioned this initiative and whether CEU would be interested. And we had many other things on our minds, as you can imagine, but I felt immediately that this is something we want to do because it ticks so many boxes. As Bernhard mentioned before, it's the academic excellence exchange. So we have a research seminar at CEU with our visiting professors. It's exchange of students. And it's inserting ourselves into the city, into in our environment, something very important for our university. We also weren't sure what is it that we can contribute to a place like Vienna that has universities like this one and the Uni Wien. I don't know if you know the size of CEU is. I mean, somebody told me that there are 6,000 students enrolled in philosophy in the University of Vienna. This is 3 times more than CEU has students, faculty, and staff. So what could we do? But I recently had a meeting with the rector here of WU Wien, and he said that he noticed that when you have job searches here, and you really attract good people, as you can see from the faculty, they have now repeatedly experienced that people said, well, I come to CEU because, oh, there's also CEU. And I found this very humbling, I have to say, because, again, we are very small in overall size, but probably have some centers of excellence that even in a city like Vienna can make a contribution. And for us, an initiative like this, and with outstanding people like Attila Melegh, is a real benefit of being here. And I'm not really revealing too much if I say that in Budapest we were not so much welcome to be part of such public and events that have such a mission as the one that we have with the International Karl Polányi Society and the Visiting Fellowship. Thank you so much.
So Andreas asked me to also welcome Attila Melegh to the Department of Socioeconomics, where I guess you will be your colleague for the next time. I already peeked into your PhD course last Thursday, and unfortunately I couldn't hear anything because we have very well sonorized rooms, so I'm very happy to actually be able to listen to you now. So at the Department of Socioeconomics, we work with people. We like structures, institutions, organizations, space, geography, nature, and I guess what you do is bridging all these, people moving from one place to another, between structures, and so on. So we are very happy to have you here and to have actually moved yourself across space. Actually, we are a very dynamic institution ourselves. We just got a new institute today, which will be headed by Andreas Novi, and is called Institutes for Spatial and Social Ecological Transformations. It replaces the Multi-Level Governance and Development Institute, so I guess you will have a new home very soon as well. Nothing will change physically. You will join economic geography and GIS science. We actually also have institutes for ecological economics, political economy of public policy, law and governance, international political economy, social policy, social change, and managing sustainability. These all sound very fancy. We also have two more old-fashioned ones, economic and social history, and sociology and social research. But then, surprise, the Economic History Institute actually also has somebody who works on formal logic and philosophy of science. So we are a very complex thing, and heading such a unit is an incredible privilege and adventure. Every time I talk to a colleague, I learn something new. I never leave a conversation without some sort of surprise. Half my work is actually approving grant proposals and then authorizing that the money can be spent on good research. And of course, the other half is, and thanks to the Vice Rectorate for Teaching and WU, that allows us to organize teaching programs where students can actually embark in this adventure of meeting all these people, doing all these different things, and actually probably coming out of our teaching programs, understanding how it all hangs together much better than each of us does. Of course, except Professor Meleg, who already has done this journey. So I'm extremely happy that we collaborate with all these institutions in the International Karl Polányi Society, a collaboration that brings us these amazing guest professors that my colleagues already talked about. And this includes Professor Meleg, who must be impatient to actually start his talk. So I guess I hand over again, not to you, but to Andreas, who's going to introduce the laudator. So thank you.
Thank you, all of you, for these welcome words and this contextualization of our visiting professorship. And I now hand over, before coming to the keynote by Attila, to Brigitte Aulenbacher, Professor of Sociology at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, and she will give the laudatio.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, dear students, dear guests, with regard to this public lecture of the Viennese Karl Polányi Visiting Professorship, it's my distinct pleasure to contribute some reflections on Attila Melegh's very remarkable and rich works, and also some experiences of our strong collaboration. I do this in my role as Vice President of the International Karl Polányi Society, as well as a researcher who has some research areas and interests in common with Attila Melegh. Please don't worry. We all are waiting for Attila Melegh's lecture, and I agreed with the organizers to make the long story, the story of his fascinating research, very short by a brief laudatory speech. I will reflect on three aspects. First, interdisciplinarity and internationality. Second, core topics of his research. And third, collaborations and experiences. The first, interdisciplinarity and internationality. In Attila Melegh's CV, we can find a real understatement. The research area and disciplinary orientation mentioned there is sociology. And indeed, Attila Melegh is a sociologist through and through. But he also studied and earned his academic degrees and collaborates in many other disciplines and fields. Just to mention few: history, economics, and anthropology. Attila Melegh combines quantitative methods and analysis, some qualitative approaches, and historical, economic, and sociological perspectives, investigating and portraying the transformative changes of capitalist, former socialist, post-socialist, and post-capitalist developments of modern societies. This leads me to my next aspect, internationality. Again, Attila Melegh's CV can be read as a clear understatement. And if we take a closer look, we can see that he could gain a lot of research experience in outstanding international scientific research institutions, in addition to his work as the most renowned Corvinus University, Budapest, just to mention two, Oxford University and Max Planck Institute. In his international perspectives, he impressively combines reflection on the international state-of-the-art research. Here refers to Malthusian and Polanyian approaches and rediscovers Lukács and some more modern classics and debates. As a very innovative theorist and critical analyst and an outstanding empirical researcher, he does a lot of comparative work analyzing Central and Eastern Europe by combining perspectives on the historical and contemporary developments. And he combines and interconnects research issues like migration, demography, economy in a geopolitical perspective, as well as on different national and inter- and supranational scales. To sum up, Attila Melegh is a scientific generalist with all the important qualifications of a specialist. This allows him to reflect on societal developments in a long-term perspective, as well as in-depth analysis of the migration term, which is at the core of his works. My second point, core topics of Attila Melegh's research. Different lectures and workshops organized by the Central European University, the University of Vienna, and the Vienna University of Economics and Business, as the hosts of the Karl Polanyi Visiting Professorship, will give Attila Melegh the opportunity to present and discuss some parts of his overwhelming works. As I don't speak Hungarian, my reflection on his core topics is very limited. Nevertheless, I'm able to read the English ones. I like to emphasize 4 of the topics which are most remarkable and part of his historical, sociological, and economic analysis done in the books The Scarcity of Care and The Migration Turn in Eastern Europe, and many more publications of articles in international journals and collections. Attila Melegh combines research on demographic change, migration, and marketization in the field of care and care work. Together with Noemi Katona, he discusses research findings by using the economic term scarcity of care. He, his team, and collaborating researchers show how the emergence of care gaps is strongly interrelated with neoliberal politics in European countries and an East-West divide between those countries which benefit or those countries which suffer from labor migration and care drain and care gain. Second, Attila Melegh's historical analysis allows to get a better understanding of contemporary neoliberal marketization because his research stimulates to carefully reflect on at least 2 aspects: the historical waves of economic liberalism, the relations between the states, politics and policies, and the principles of the market exchange and economy, and the geopolitical strategies and ethics. This includes a very careful reading of modern classics like Polanyi, as well as the attempt to better understand the geopolitical embeddedness of the developments in different countries and European terrains, as well as world regions. Third, Attila Melegh's investigation of the historical and contemporary development carefully distinguishes between structural, institutional, and discursive aspects. This allows him to bridge the gap between the analysis of the material aspects of migration and of right-wing populism and other ideological framings of the topic in our predominant discourses. Moreover, it allows him to shed light on the authoritarian turn in more and more regions and countries and its interwovenness with the crisis-driven neoliberal market capitalism. Fourth, Attila Melegh's research is also an investigation on what he names non-capitalist mixed economies. The contemporary relevance of this topic is evident. On the one hand, alternative visions of a future we want are lacking utopias, not only but not at least on the backdrop of the failed socialist movements of the past. On the other hand, there is a vivid discussion on the reconceptualization of the economy and the relation of economy and society. Attila Melegh's research can be understood as a profound contribution to this debate, providing reflections on the past and present, encouraging to envision future. My last point, collaborations and experiences. Attila Melegh is the founding director of the Karl Polányi Center at Corvinus University, Budapest, and strong collaboration partner of the International Karl Polányi Society from day one. His engagement made it possible to organize common conferences like the combined event Karl Polanyi for the 21st Century, Karl Polanyi and the Future of Humankind, and Universal Capitalism in Decline. Bridging the gaps between West and East European research institutions, Attila Melegh is an important protagonist of the exchange of researchers. Just to give one example, the very important international collection of The Scarcity of Care, co-edited with Noemi Katona. Furthermore, Attila Melegh is a generous host also with regard to young scholars. Just to quote the experience of our doc team, the contested provisioning of care and housing and organizers of this conference, the PhD candidates Benjamin Baumgartner, Valentin Fröhlich, Florian Pimminger, and Hans Vollmary. Not only did Attila Melegh warmly welcome us at the start of our research stay in Hungary at Corvinus University in Budapest, he moreover provided us with space to advance our research in a meaningful way and engage in valuable discussions. Shortly after our arrival, Attila arranged a meeting of the whole doc team at Corvinus University with the head of the Department of Sociology and Social Policy, which led to a presentation at the department's research seminar. He also invited us to the Demographic Research Institute of the Central Statistical Office and let us gain extremely important insights into the multidisciplinary work on narratives of aging and demographic change. He further insisted on the correct application of theoretical concepts, and we have benefited greatly from this. This shows us that young scholars can expect a lot of insights when they will attend Attila Melegh's talks and workshops in Vienna in these weeks. However, I did not only interview PhD candidates, but also Margaret Mondell, the director of the Montreal Karl Polányi Institute of Political Economy, Concordia University in Canada. She sends her warmest congratulations. Quoting here, our collaboration with Professor Melegh has resulted in several activities, including in-person and online international conferences, bringing together scholars and students from countries in the north and in the south. Professor Melegh's commitment to extending the influence of Karl Polanyi into his critical and important work on migration and on care has been instrumental in broadening the relevance of Polanyi to contemporary issues of great concern. Our ongoing partnership with colleagues in Hungary reflects Professor Melegh's commitment to the work of Karl Polanyi and to the ongoing collaboration with the Institute in Montreal.
and we can add. The same could be said from our Viennese perspective. Thank you very much for being here, Attila, and we are looking forward to listening to and to discussing with you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's now nearly time for the lecture, but before we have to... thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you very much. I put it down, right? Thank you.
And now the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, this is really a privilege to be here. And I have to say a couple of personal things before I start talking about rather serious and rather gloomy things. So better to speak about good things before we go into that. So first of all, I'm extremely grateful to all 4 organizations for providing this professorship and then to let me into this amazing intellectual network. And I'm just coming, such exciting discussions like, how to reintroduce planning. So I'm very grateful to the International Karl Polányi Society. And Brigitte, you're absolutely right. From day one, we have been working together, and I don't know how many more days are coming in this respect. I'm also very grateful to this distinguished, amazingly for us always model universities, University of Vienna here, University of Economics and Business, and of course Central European University. This, I think, is really a privilege to be here, and I hope that any kind of an intellectual collaboration is just going to work further ahead, regardless of all the changes we are going through day by day. So I'm very lucky. I'm also very lucky because I have got into such intellectual circles from which I have got not only collegial but friendship, basically, and working with you, Brigitte, Andreas, and various, you have mentioned the younger scholars as well. I mean, it's such a delightful exercise that it gives a lot of gloom, it pushes away a lot of gloomy feelings in this neoliberal era when higher education is being marketized. So that, I think, when we are really doing something, then it's extremely great privilege. The third thing why I'm very grateful is because of Polanyi. Polanyi, I mean, to be honest, I started very personally. So I never knew that when I was a secondary school kid, and I was born in, I was in my hometown, Pécs, in Hungary, in South Hungary. I went into the very beautiful library of the university as a secondary school kid. And then one of the first books I took, luckily, I mean, I've been lucky in various ways, was Karl Polányi's book on Dahomey, which was beautifully translated by the excellent anthropologist Mihály Sárkány, who was a big protagonist of Polanyi. And I started reading on Dahomey. To be honest, the only thing I could understand that it was super interesting and it had a very good smell. And then I was assured when I entered the university very soon after being a soldier. So I went to the university, and then the first economic history professor, Tibor Tóth, started talking about economic institutional developments and started like this: okay, my dear, you have to read Malinowski and Polanyi, very importantly. So I was very lucky. At that time, I did not know that it would be so important in my life that in the end I come here and I have this professorship. But taking it a little bit more even seriously, Polanyi is an emblem of a lot of things. Polanyi is an emblem of understanding universal development and actually giving out of a conceptual framework. So that's fantastic. The second, he's an emblem of linking Vienna to Budapest. His life, his everything is linking these two cities for the good, because it's not always the case. So Polanyi is showing how progressive critical thinking in these very important cities can happen in Central Europe, and that I think makes the whole thing for me really delightful, and so I feel very lucky. That's the only thing I can say at the end, and thank you very much for all the very kind words. Now with this, unfortunately, we have to go to something else. Okay. And then my talk is going to be on a very Polanyian question. Whenever we think about Polanyi and the theory of Polanyi, is actually, for me, it's one of the things, balance. He rarely uses the term balance, but all the time, when he looks at societies, he's trying to look at the problems of imbalances. In case one social form, let's say the market, takes over all other forms and suppresses, then this is his criticism all the time. But even in forensic history, he goes back and then thinks about this balance. I wanted to ask a question, are we seeing in the rise of nationalism currently as some kind of an attempt to balance the imbalance? Can we see this as a double movement? Now this is how Polanyi actually put it, the question to us. 1945, as we learned it yesterday, he was rushing back from America to Europe in order to help the reconstructing of these societies after the devastating, horrible Second World War. And then let me just quote him, because he's writing about Eastern Europe. If the Atlantic Charter really committed us to restore free markets where they have disappeared, we might thereby be opening the door to the reintroduction of crazy nationalism into regions from which it has disappeared. We should not only be importing unemployment and starvation into the liberated regions simply by liberating the local markets, we should also be burdening ourselves with the responsibility of having thrown back the people into the anarchy out of which, by their own exertions, they had just emerged. When I found this, and then International Karl Polányi Society very nicely republished this study, which is a beautiful title, Universal Capitalism or Regional Planning. What an amazing title. When I found this, I knew that I had to do something with this, because when I found it, I was in the midst of all kinds of research and changes, and then I could see that that is actually one of the things. But the problem here, and I think it leads to a lot of debate, and I'm trying to contribute to that, is that this issue is that how market utopia can lead to nationalism or to any kind of double movement is not really explained in terms of mechanisms. And I think it's one of the key things. It's a very broad claim. But what are the real historical, sociological links? How we can see this empirically? How we can test this empirically that Polanyi is correct in his assessment? And then this issue is the rise of nationalism, very importantly, anti-migrant nationalism as a double movement. It comes from various discussions. The International Karl Polányi Society, just 2 years ago, I think, had a very interesting debate on Brexit. And whether Brexit could be seen, and then we all know the Brexit divided a lot of people in terms of thinking about social development. And then there was this debate where Bob Jessop and Nigel Ling-Sum and then various other people talked. Also, I learned a lot from this, from a distinguished Polanyian who did massive things on reconstructing and using Polanyi, Chris Hahn. And then when he was working on Hungary and Poland and China, and very importantly, when he first commented the refugee crisis, then he started talking about this problem of embeddedness and then the longing for that and then some kind of a double movement. And then yesterday we had the launch of the book, this amazingly important book, The Routledge-Book of Karl Polányi by Klaus and Michele. Good to be that I can see them here. And then in that thing also this issue of double movement as a problem, what we can consider as a double movement, what we cannot consider as a double movement, it goes through as a thread throughout the whole handbook. And then there are all kinds of debates was there. Okay, now let me give my understanding and my reading. Of course, Polanyi is a very dynamic thinker. He is not very mechanic. So he's working. He's working on social development. He's confronting new and new things, and then he starts using his vocabulary on this. And then double movement is one of the terms. But in my understanding, when I was rereading The Great Transformation last year, then I had the feeling that I misunderstood something. Double movement is not just an immediate, any kind of a reaction to marketization, but actually it's a historical epoch. It's a dynamic concept in the sense that double movement is called movement because it's referring to historical change as well. It's not referring to a movement, but it is referring to some historical change. So in my understanding, the Great Transformation is an amazingly good social and economic history on the 19th century, early 20th century, which is arguing in the following way, and then this is what I'm trying to use here as well, that the gold standard period and the 19th century liberal market economy was due to the dominance of the market and due to the impersonal control, like the gold standard in the whole story, led to enormous number of social tensions. These tensions got reactions at that time, and there were certain state interventions because of these tensions, but as it is also in this handbook beautifully, but these interventions did not work out. So basically it could not solve the problems, and then piling up, these tensions piling up, later led to a change, first in various directions, one towards socialism, but also very importantly toward fascism, because Polanyi was crystal clear in this respect. So I would like to do some kind of contribution to this historical understanding of these debates. So I would like to contribute to the above debate. I would like to talk about globalization, deglobalization, migration and social reactions, and new points in the origins of our time in doing a macro analysis. I think everybody forgets it's a beautiful subtitle what Polanyi used, Origins of Our Time. I think that is, for me, an everyday something. Then I am also trying to use various other thinkers in this, very importantly Gramsci and Lukács, so to analyze the complex historical interplay between material and non-material factors. And then, very importantly, I would like to focus on Eastern Europe, because I think I learned something very important. In order to do global history, nonetheless, you have to have a specific focus on the basis of which you are trying to look at these things. Now, let me be a little bit even more practical. The pictures and all these things, I hope they are not really distracting you. But here are I made some key assumptions in this claim that nationalism, the current rise of nationalism, can be seen as some kind of a double movement. And then I'm going to address all assumptions during my talk, and I try to give an answer or a comment at least concerning that. The first thing, we assume that nationalism can be a double movement here, or it is actually a double movement. We are not sure, right? This is a question. The first one, we assume that market utopia, I think I made a mistake, leads to higher levels of migration, and there is a systemic link historical between globalization and migration. This is number one, which we have to demonstrate. Once again, it's not an easy task. Second, there is globalization and free market, and then this appears in the migration discourses. Third, we also assume that globalization and higher migration leads to more restrictive migration policies and then interventions. That is also very important. We also assume that globalization and higher migration levels pushes up anti-migrant sentiment in society. So one is on policy level, the second one is on attitudes. And then we also assume that the link is stronger when globalization indices are higher and or migration is at higher levels. And number 6, and this is I think very important, we assume that new populist rulers or new populist elites question at least partially the neoliberal policies and arrangements. And that, I think, is also very, very important. So these are the assumptions I'm going to look at, and I'm trying to do some empirical analysis of this. The first thing which we have to say, do we have really a rise of nationalism? You know, that's not an easy question, but I wanted to use the last European Parliament election, right? And then I wanted to look at whether there is a rise of anti-migrant nationalism and when did it start. And then you can see that in case you looked at the map of Europe, then you could see that various countries actually showed this change massively. It was Italy, France. You could see that it doesn't matter that the outcome finally was not that decisive, but I think the strength was very important. The UK, the Czech Republic, Hungary, Poland, and so on. But that's not just a European phenomenon, and that's very important. Although, before we go that, I wanted to pinpoint my key interest in the Polanyian question, and that's my home country, Hungary. And here you can see how the majority, the whole campaign was based on anti-migrant nationalism and claiming sovereignty. And then you can see the outcome of the last election, right, for Hungary and Budapest. And in order, in case you are lost in this, so the orange color is the color of Fidesz, right? So I think I don't need to explain that in certain countries there is some kind of a hegemony, right? So this is what happened. Okay. Now, but let's go a little bit globally, but that's also very important. As a preliminary exercise, I made the following, you know, kind of short analysis. We have the very good survey since the 1980s, the World Value Survey. And the World Value Survey contains at least one consistent question on anti-migrant attitudes. It's a classic question, is that do you want a migrant or a foreign worker in your neighborhood, right? And then it goes in. And of course it has different topics, but that's something very important. And then I looked at it, and I'm trying to, my slides are very empirical, and maybe too much is put there, but I try to show that which are the countries before the refugee crisis which could where we could demonstrate that there was a rise of anti-migrant attitudes. And then we could see that this was countries like Azerbaijan, Belarus, Estonia, Georgia, Russia, Kyrgyzstan, Hungary, South Korea, Japan, Turkey, South Africa, India. Any close look at this already suggests that there might be a link between an authoritarian turn and this issue of migration, although it's, you know, it's just an idea and it's not proving the things, it's just, you know, association. But I think it's very important that we could see this. And then I will come back to Eastern Europe in general. But the only thing I wanted to show here, that there are some links between nationalism and public opinion of anti-migrant feelings during globalization till the refugee crisis. At least for me, it was enough to continue the analysis. So there is a rise of authoritarian nationalism in certain regions. These changes might be linked to migration, but we need to look at the links very closely. Is it really a double movement? So first, let us look at the material structural link and how it can be analyzed. Assumption number one. These are coming out of my recent book as well. So I'm going to refer to massive analysis, which I'm not going to present you. But I want to show you that the systemic links, how they actually could operate. So one thing how we can link globalization and migration is one of the ways, and this comes from the distinguished, very important scholar Saskia Sassen, very early in 1988, she wrote a very important piece, Foreign Direct Investment as a Neglected Variable. That was this article, a brilliant article. And then she was arguing that, globalization means massive, much higher mobility of foreign capital, and foreign capital is uprooting, and actually capital and labor goes like this, across, because of the inequality systems, and also because, foreign capital is a radical actor of historical change. So if it enters into a society, then it changes things well. And then that was actually one of the indices I was looking at. And with my colleague Zoltán Csányi, we made a historical modeling of 77 countries. What was this historical modeling about? It was a simple idea, although it was very difficult to do it in the end. It was a multivariate modeling based on the things that how certain values of the variables, like foreign direct investment as related to GDP, how it is changing between 1990 and 1995, and how it is affecting later developments of, we analyze it for emigration, 5 years later, 10 years later, and 15 years later. So, in 15 years' time, right? And then this is what we were trying. We wanted to avoid the non-historical structural multivariate analysis. We wanted to make a historical one. And then we looked at various indices. One is foreign direct investment, and then you can see that this is how FDI inflow as a percentage of GDP and immigration rate was linked. One thing I would like to stress here, there is always a mistake of non-historical understanding. This is what we can learn from Polanyi, and this is why actually the FDI inflow as GDP and the actual rate, there is a 10 years difference, because we need to have some kind of a leverage for this. And then we use this for 5 years, 10 years, and 15 years. And then we had the following variables: foreign direct investment inflow, starting level of emigration. That's very important, because this is how we wanted to take into account cumulative effects. Migration is very much a network-based phenomenon, and cumulative effects are very important. So one migration can lead to further migration, and that's something very important we wanted to take in. We also use GDP per capita, also because of modernization theories, and also because migration means that you need to have resources in order to be mobile, right? Very nicely put. For the mobility, you need resources, right? And we also took into account employment in agriculture, and then we wanted to see how they affect. Now, one thing which is very, very important is that, for instance, foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP, in the beginning of globalization, very much showing world system theory in a lot of ways, because world system theory argues with regard to migration, as soon there is an opening up of economies in front of global capitalism, then it leads to a massive uprooting and migration. This is true. On the basis of the modeling, we can argue very nicely that that's the case. But there's one more question, and then I'm going to show you now very complicated slides. It's better to listen to me because it's going to be complicated. This analysis was repeated with later periods. So the analysis in the original one was between 1990 and 95, and how it affects later development, right, till 2000, 2005, and 2010. Now you can see that in case we start the analysis not in 1990, 1995, but in 95 and 2000, then how it goes on. And then we can also see that for varying time periods. The key point here is to check whether these variables would work similarly in later and different time periods throughout globalization. This is crucial, because the first finding is just the first finding. And then here comes something which was very important for me to understand, that this is wrong to claim that these macro variables have a systemic effect throughout the globalization period, because that would be a mistake. So here you can see these are the 5-year effects. The green shows that this is significant, and then you can see also whether it's positive or negative. There's only one systematic variable in macro analysis of migration. That's the starting level of migration, which is collecting a lot of previous historical development. But this is very important because it shows that this has a systematic effect. And I think it's important even from the point of view of double movement in some ways. The others show a mess. Sometimes they lose significance, but it's still, let's say it's positive, right? So let's say GDP per capita goes up, and then emigration also goes up, right? So but sometimes they turn out to be negative. So foreign direct investment can produce negative results in the outcome, which means that, I mean, hey, there is something wrong. This is historically, we haven't found the most systematic historical model, which means that globalization can have different phases. And then these different phases have to be analyzed differently, and we have to look at that very importantly. Schooling, periphery dummy, semi-periphery, all these things were important in this. Then it is for 10-year effects. Once again, look at this FDI inflows percentage of GDP, right? These are the 10-year effects. Then you can see it's not so significant, slightly significant in the beginning. You see the yellow, and then it goes to significant and negative, right? Which goes against, actually it's not in the book, by the way. What I'm telling you now is some sort of a further analysis. The book has not been finished yet, right? So I'm working on that, because in the book, there was only the original model was used. Okay. Then you can see the 15-year effect, and it's once again, it's somewhat chaotic, and I think we need to go back and then to analyze this very carefully. So this overall claim that globalization as such has a systematic effect concerning the levels of emigration and thus on immigration, it needs to be nuanced. And that's something very important. So we already have a question mark concerning this, whether this can be linked. Now, one more warning, which was a big warning for me. Now we are in era, and then various debates are going on in Budapest, in Vienna, everywhere, deglobalization. What's going on? And there is a massive discussion. Even the UN universities having a special lecture series on deglobalization and so on. Which means that, for instance, like variables like foreign direct investment are actually, it's very cyclical. It's beautifully cyclical, right? Christopher Chase Dunn would be very happy to see this, right? Actually, he writes about deglobalization on the basis of this as well. And it goes down. Is, for instance, foreign direct investment a regulator of migration processes? That's a reasonable question. And then you can see, no. Because it seems that in case you look at the global statistics since the 1980s, migration intensity is going up. It is increasing. Migration levels are increasing more than population levels. And then it is not stopping. Actually, this is already a very important thought. Maybe it's not globalization which is causing a problem, but deglobalization is causing a problem when actually migration doesn't stop, but continues. So deglobalization as a problem of stagnation or a problem of economic problems, that can be. I have further examples for this. For instance, that this is also related to geopolitical and geoeconomic changes. Right, so we have two warnings now already concerning the argument. Assumption number 2. Is there a marketization ideology? I think it's very important. A lot of people who study nationalism, I think they make one mistake, that they don't study non-nationalism at the same time, because it's always an interaction between the two. Is there a marketization ideology? Oh, yes. concerning migration. Massive ideology. For the book, I analyzed, I don't know, thousands of World Bank documents, plus scholarly papers of the elite, and so on and so on. And we are standing now in Vienna, and Mises would be very happy. Mises would be happy to see that all kinds of experts, all kinds of people talk about the thing, oh, migration is a fantastic source of development. It's the best allocation of human labor. The efficiency of that, the efficiency outcome of that human labor is going to lead to a $1 trillion check. Actually, this is this is very funny that in the various different experts are always using this $1 trillion check, right? It's kind of a topos. Now, here it is. I just wanted to show you one thing, McKinsey Global Institute, which is, you know, it's a very important market agency, and this is what they are saying: moving more labor to higher productivity, setting boosts global GDP. Migrants of all skill levels contribute to this effect, whether through innovation and entrepreneurship or through freeing up natives for higher value work. In fact, migrants make up just 3.4% of the total world population, but the McKinsey Global Institute's research finds that they contribute nearly 10% of global GDP. They contributed roughly 6.7 trillion to the global GDP in 2015, and some 3 trillion more than that they would have produced in their origin countries. Developed nations realize more than 90% to this effect. Actually, it's very honest, at least at the end, right? So who is benefiting out of this? But the point I'm trying to make, which I think is very important, that we cannot argue in this double movement way in case we don't see it, but we have this evidence very clearly that major organizations, international organizations, institutes, the elites are very much promoting this pro-market ideology. Once again, I'm not evaluating, I'm analyzing. I'm a historian here who is trying to analyze interactions. But the first thing which we have to see, that the market utopia is also an ideological thing. And this is, I think, one of the things what we can learn from Karl Polanyi. Okay. Now here comes further surprises. I'm not the only one who is surprised. There are other scholars who are also surprised. Everybody assumes the following: okay, globalization leads to further migration, fine. The second is that this leads to ideas of opening up, but when they see migration going up, then it should lead to restrictive migration policies. And then actually, in case we look at migration policies, then we don't see that, right? So this is, the UN has a fantastic database. I recommend everybody to consult it. It's a database on population policies, including migration policies. Since 1986, we have systematic data on what governments are reporting concerning their ideas and wishes concerning population development. Of course, you have to analyze this critically in a lot of ways, but nonetheless, for a long-term global perspective, I think this can be really interesting. And then you can see, is there a change in immigration policies? And then you can see that more governments actually would like to have to raise immigration levels, okay? The most dominant answer is no change or maintain the levels, and that's actually increasing. And then you can see to lower it, actually it is declining, which was a surprise for me to see. And then there is a famous study by Hein de Haas, Nettori, and Vezzoli. I also know this because I had to work for them to providing the Hungarian data for that. And they came also to the same conclusion. Globalization doesn't lead to restrictive migration policies. On the contrary, it is not leading to that. The only thing they are saying, and this is something super important to us, but more selective. And that was the argument. And I think that was an important argument. Now let's look at the emigration policies. The emigration policies according to the UN database. And then you can see that increasing the levels of emigration, which was a policy in the 1970s, or a suggested policy for a lot of poor countries, increase emigration and it's going to help you in terms of very Malthusian idea. And then you can see that the most important thing is to maintain in the beginning, and then the idea of no intervention, but later, by the end of globalization, then you can see that a lot of countries would like to reduce emigration, and a lot of countries would like to maintain the levels. To raise emigration is less, but very importantly, we can argue that the awareness of emigration problems is there. Hendehaas very wisely said that it's a bottleneck effect, because the number of emigrant countries is just going up rapidly. The number of immigrant countries remain the same. So, which means higher emigration, higher migration, and that there is some kind of a contradiction here, and then something to be there. Okay, so the point is that once again, when we look at historically the argument, then we have to be careful, right? That's okay. Which means that maybe, and this is something I put it here, right? Maybe this is just symbolic what we are seeing in front of it. There is a big show going on concerning migration policy and fences. There you can see the Hungarian Prime Minister, who actually yesterday very much agreed with the Prime Minister of Chile on how good it is to have fences, right? And then you can see Donald Trump, but we can see the shift of the Biden policy as well, very importantly in this respect. And we always forget Modi in this respect, but he is also, I mean, India has always been very anxious about immigration, but now Modi is raising these sentiments via anti-Muslim arguments. So maybe these are just partial stories. So once again, we should not believe in this, but governments are working on a more way. And then here comes really the case. So I'm coming from a country which every day 10,000 times says no migration, right? Billboards are telling you everything in case you want to forget it. In case you switch on the Hungarian so-called public TV, then, oh yes, migration crisis is just coming day and night. Okay, is this the government policy? By the way, I checked the Hungarian policy in this UN database, and it was very positive on migration till 2015. That's one thing which I would like to mention. The other thing I would like to mention is that no way. Hungary has not very high levels of immigration, but relatively high levels of immigration, as compared to other countries like Romania, Poland, and so on. And there are certain labor market problems. And we can definitely say that large-scale investors are basically telling to the government directly, we need labor. What does the government do? Very simply, it says, okay, then we get. And now there is a program in Hungary which is trying to get hundreds of thousands of workers from Asia. The numbers are not so high at the moment, but it's actually increasing rather rapidly, but various days. All this is done. This is something very important. All this is done. So the key point that this is not in that sense a double movement, that it is really trying to keep local borders more intact in this, right? But actually it is promoting this, but in a very selective way. So we have all this is done in a discursive context of bipartisan racist discourses. Opposition parties are also promoting the anti-migrant discourses massively. I can give you zillions of examples, especially now with this guest worker program, which is causing a lot of headache in terms of workplaces, and then workers being absolutely anxious. Last year, I gave a talk to trade union representatives, and they were telling me that it was boiling in this respect. So, Hein-de-Haas is correct, harsher and harsher selection in an amazing discursive context. One more thing I would like to mention. Institutionally speaking, these people have real problems. No family reunification. They have to be in the country for maximum 2 or 3 years altogether. They have to leave immediately as the contract expires. They are supposedly should not go to other countries. Whether they do this or not, that's another case. Employers would like to restrict even their motion between companies, and even there are ideas how to put them geographically into a separate place, not at the quote-unquote Hungarian communities, right? So that, I think, is very important. This is the framework, and that's it. Can we call this double movement, this nationalism, or not? I think our questions are just piling up in this respect. Okay, globalization leads to more negative attitudes, right? That's the next assumption, right? Is it so? This is also already in my book, but when I looked at it, I nearly fainted. I calculated it twice, because I was absolutely sure that during globalization, overall, tendencies are negative concerning that. And then I looked at the World Value Survey, and then I looked at how to compare the first part of globalization, first 15 years, and then the second part. When I put this together, then I looked at the green line, and it's stagnating. And then I looked at the regional data, and that was really surprising. Then I could see that Asia is very anxious. Japan, India, we all know actually in the literature we know this, but it was really interesting to see it. And then I could see Africa, which was rather worried in the beginning of the period. Actually, it's becoming more open in terms of attitudes. Once again, I'm not evaluating, I'm just telling the story, right, in that respect. And then I could also see the so-called West, including Australia and New Zealand as well, is actually a little bit going up, but remaining very, very open. And then you can see the other Latin America, which is actually now turning. You see Chile, the Venezuelan migrants are changing things, Brazil is changing. So things are changing, I'm not saying. The only thing I'm saying is that it's relatively open, right? It's not really, there was only one region which was actually doing a massive negative turn, and that was Eastern Europe. Now, I checked the non-East European data especially. I checked it for the Eurobarometer. I checked it for various things. And then, no, we can confirm that that's the case. Eastern Europe is special. Now, is Eastern Europe special? I just followed the argument. Is Eastern Europe special because it's super globalized? Because that would mean that in case the real historical shock of opening up was bigger in Eastern Europe, then we might actually find an explanation for this, and it would be something like that. And then I got into two things. Just a second. First, I go to historically. No, sorry, I go to this. Now, this is a very complicated graph. Sorry, don't try to look at it. Don't try to understand it. I explain, right? So the y-axis is actually on levels of emigration as related to the sending population. And then you can see the x-axis is FDI as a percentage of GDP, right? Okay. Now, what is the key point here? In case you look at that brown line, that's the global tendency, right? So globally speaking, how foreign direct investment as a percentage of GDP changed, and then how the levels of emigration changed, right? Okay. What do you see in the case of Eastern Europe? It's above everything. In terms of FDI, they are producing figures which nobody else is producing. I checked it for even Latin America. Latin America is, I think, a middle brother as compared to us in terms of this openness. So Eastern Europe is producing both in emigration levels and both in FDI as a percentage. It is producing massive openness and the massive increase of openness in both respects, right? That's the key point. So it's super globalized, which means that we might have this kind of an idea. But let's look at one more thing. I would like to draw your attention to one thing, which was, once again, I looked at it only after the book. So it's not in the book as well. But why is it that Eastern Europe, at the change of the regime, is already so much emigrant? I asked myself. And then historically, I think there's a story to be written. Because of the border changes, because of the historical developments of Eastern Europe, and various other things, Eastern Europe has been very open in terms of emigration previously as well. So there's something to be rewritten. And maybe the very famous Hungarian political philosopher István Bibó, he was correct when he was writing in the time of Polanyi. He was writing that there is a misery of small East European states. Why are they so hysteric? Because they are anxious about their own borders. Now, in case we put the two things together, emigration and economic openness, then you can see that there might be some kind of an anxiety about borders, because both your economy and your people are very much, opened up in a lot of ways, and actually opening up more, right? And then we also talk about small language communities. We are talking about communities where the language which is spoken culturally can be 2 million, can be 5 or can be 10. Only a couple of countries have higher levels of that, right? So it means that there's something to think about, that this special East European syndrome there might be. So maybe for Eastern Europe, this double movement in the sense there. But is it really double movement when it's already historically inherited as well? Maybe it's just a continuation of a previous history. So once again, we had that. Plus, I hope you can still follow it, but this is really, I wanted to share you with my, thinking about this. Okay. So Eastern Europe, is Eastern Europe homogeneous in terms of anti-migrant attitudes? A lot of people think they are, but they are not. Not at all. There are massive differences. Some of the countries are showing very high levels of negative attitudes. Some of the countries are showing much less, right? And then this is, the World Value Survey, and this is the change, and then also the European Social Survey, I checked as well. And then you can see that certain countries are the ones which show this, which are the key countries in terms of anti-migrant attitudes, most importantly against non-Europeans. And that's Hungary, for sure. That's Czech Republic, and very importantly, Estonia. Right? These are the ones. The others, not so much. Time to time, there is a change, but not so much, which means that we have to explain that this, in case there is an East European syndrome, that why is it affecting in one way in this way, and why is it not affecting in the other way? Which is, a headache. It was a headache for me in the book as well. And I was thinking about this very seriously. Okay. And also very importantly, I would like to share one thing with you. In the case of Hungary, we have long-term data, and Hungary turned to be anti-migrant in the middle of the 1990s. So either we say it's just exactly at the globalization period, so it's not currently happening. So is it really and we were still in this market euphoria at that time, so how is that coming together? So once again, one question mark. Now one more twist. Okay, in case you look at the things, how anti-migrants, once again, don't look at it, it's very important for me because this is how I analyzed it. You are the first to see this result, right? Okay. This is about multimodal, multivariate analysis, also a different type. And then here the point is, which are the migration discursive items? This is we are doing in a Europeanization project. what discursive items are related to that. And once again, I make it very, very short, because that would be a completely different lecture. At the CEU, I'm going to speak about this in details, right? And I will show you how it actually goes. And then this table is actually showing the, not only just the association between different discursive items. Mainly, we are trying to explain one discursive item, which is the following, that the many more foreign workers would cause even bigger problems in Hungary. And then whether it's related to other discourses, it's not just the association and the link in that is important, but also this is a marginal effect, which means that which are the key statements which actually have the biggest effect in this multivariate modeling, right? It's a kind of a marginal effect, mechanical marginal effect analysis, right? And when I could see this, and once again, you know, this is not very easy, but once again, I almost fainted, because two things. One is East-West hierarchy. So one is that we do not want to be a second-class citizen in terms of developmental hierarchies. So some kind of a developmental frustration is behind this. Plus, the EU is promoting LGBTQ propaganda, which means that this is a competitive and biopolitical nationalism. It's not a social nationalism, but it's a biopolitical and competitive thing. So once again, we have to be careful. This is question number 4, I think. Now, we are coming to the end soon, right? But let me make a couple of more comments. So, my argument is that the change and the link between globalization and migration is there. It's not so systematic. We have to be very clear in historical periods. But we cannot say that this rising nationalism is some kind of a double movement nationalism. At least this is my position in this. Jobbke wrote a very good book very recently concerning neoliberal nationalism. And he was arguing not for Eastern Europe. He was arguing for other countries like Britain. That here what we are seeing is not anti-neoliberal nationalism, but we are seeing neoliberal nationalism. And I think he's correct. In case we take this seriously, then we can say that this is some kind of a new era we are entering now. And this new era is that this authoritarian or more authoritarian or less democratic nationalisms use migration as a very important topic in formulating their hold, but they are not shifting neoliberal policies. I think what I could show you concerning my own country is a prime example of that, in that sense. So, nationalism in this sense is not a double movement, but a constitutive element of this new era, which means it's a new management of some kind of a processes which have started earlier. This also shows that this new era of capitalism is not a brand new one, but maybe just a new management of neoliberal patterns which could not be sold and maintained in the old ways. So the elites have changed their position. No double movement yet. Tensions are rising, especially with regard to migration. Migration has become such a hot topic that it shows a lot of tensions and contradictions. Contradictions are piling up, but still in the face of neoliberal era with more repression. Also, very importantly, we live in an era when capitalist blocks are being reconfigured and wars and conflicts. And that, I think, is one more thing. And then I just put here Karl Polanyi when she gave a fantastic talk in Budapest in 2019, right? We wish all the best to her as well, right now. When at the age of 96, she jumped out of the plane from Montreal, and the next day gave a 1-hour talk without paper, right? I can't do that. So she is warning actually in the Polanyi handbook, she is warning very importantly, referring back to the Polanyian analysis as well, this warlike situation. We are not in a new Cold War, but we are entering into a real hot war phases, and that's going to cause a lot of troubles, especially in migration and asylum seekers. Look at these things. This is also very Polanyian. This is the Oslo Peace Institute, which shows the number of conflicts. So we are really in a new era in which you can see that the blue is going up massively. What is the blue? This is also related to the Polanyian analysis of the 1920s and 30s, is internationalized civil conflict. Internationalized civil wars are going up massively, which means that this is not it's the outcome of the previous historical development. Now, the very concrete conclusions I would like to draw you for the point for further research, and then I finish. The link between globalization and the rise of migration existed only in specific historical periods, and in later periods, some of the assumed links show opposite effects. We have to take this very seriously. New research is to be done, whether this linkage is there or not. Deglobalization did not stop the rise of migration. Maybe this is the clash which leads to a nationalist turn. We have to revise the original assumptions. Globalization did not lead to a massive global rise of anti-migrant attitude. That's also something very important. Eastern Europe was special in this respect. It has been super globalized from the early 1990s, and very importantly, super emigrant already at the change of the regime. So maybe the East European story is a very special story. Once again, I checked it for everybody else. It was the highest. Even Eastern Europe, nonetheless, in this story varied a lot, and the whole process started in the 1990s. And then certain countries showed this trajectory from very early on. So the ultimate conclusion I have is that we have to have global analysis, but at the same time, we have to write specific histories. And now I use Ulf Brumbauer and Grandage, a very good book. The overall structural inclination and concrete histories have an interplay. This is what I was trying to demonstrate to you. And then we have to consider real historical events, including the rise of new nationalism, to be a consequence of complex connections between temporalities and structures. This analysis interprets the debate on migration and the transformation of Eastern Europe as a historical event, as the joint result of material and discursive structures. Till we are doing this, the only thing we know that something is boiling, and maybe we are just in the prelude of a new phase when double movement can start. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Attila. We have one comment before we open to the floor for questions. The comment will be by a colleague from our university, WU Vienna, Judith Kohlenberger, from the Institute of Social Policies from the Department of Socioeconomics. Please, Judith.
Well, thank you so much, Attila. This was even better than the book, I have to say. I think this is also because you're such a lively speaker. I was blown away, and I was just nodding heavily. I hope you saw it, because I was so enthralled by what you said. I don't even know where to start, but I will keep it rather short because we're already advanced in time. Maybe we can continue the discussion in private then. Well, first of all, I want to congratulate the organizers of this talk today on a very, very timely lecture, as we are heading towards the EU elections, of course, where we know not only is migration again a very salient topic, but also we know that populist right-wing parties are on the rise really across Europe. We do see some country differences and regional differences, but overall this topic of nationalism is a very important one in this day and age, I would say. And also very timely because, as you very well know, we just finalized the great EU Pact on Migration and Asylum, right, which is supposed again to welcome a turn in migration policy, we'll see, also with regards to a more restrictive rhetoric at least. And it's interesting what you just said with regards to, well, when we look at actual policies, we do not see much more restrictive movement. The same can be said of the actual policies that are enshrined in some parts of the pact, where a lot of the narrative is becoming more restrictive, but the actual policies, in particular when it comes, of course, to labor migration, to legalization of migration, they remain rather stable. I was very pleased to find out when I sort of researched not only your book, but also how it came about, that your own interest in the topic really started to foster in this record year of 2015, the year of the so-called refugee crisis, because my own interest in this topic, forced migration in particular, also started in this year, so we have that much in common. And I also think we share, if I may say so, a certain interest in all the contradictions and, as I like to call them, paradoxes that surround migration policy, but also the reality. And indeed, I would say that one of the really big assessments when we look at the migration debate as it is unfolding in the political discourse and the public arena is really an increasing discrepancy between the reality of migration, the numbers, also the attitudes towards migration, and on the other hand, the discourse surrounding it. So we do see a certain really schism in a way that is happening between these two aspects. What I find particularly thrilling in your talk now is that you focused so much, or that you really tried to emphasize this notion of selection, the selection of migration. So it's sort of too fast of a conclusion to argue that overall our attitudes toward migration have become more negative and that our policies have become more restrictive, but rather both have become more selective. And I'm particularly working on issues of forced migration, refugee migration, and this is indeed something that we see very much, and I think that is enhanced again by the EU border regime that we have been instigated over the last years, especially over the last decade, I would say, where in fact we have entered in a regime that enhances an economic selection of humanitarian migrants, simply because humanitarian migrants from third countries, as the EU calls them, in kind of a hubris way, so humanitarian migrants, refugees seeking asylum in the EU on European territory, are actually selected by the kind of resources they have, because they actually, for lack of legal and safe pathways, have to resort to, well, the smuggling industry, which again would be really interesting to explore with reference to all the marketization forces that you so excellently pinpoint in the book. So what we see is that only people who have the according resources, capital resources, so financial capital, but also social capital, that those people with the according resources will be the ones who will find ways to seek and to be granted protection. So fleeing to Europe basically entails this form of economic selection, which means, and this is now rather cynical to say, but I think it's quite true when we look at Europe's border regime, that the richest, and this means the fittest in the sense of the ones best adapted to the market, the fittest, the richest, will find ways of seeking protection and of being granted a protection. It's not the most vulnerable, which we claim to be providing this protection with, but actually there are also these marketization forces at work, and there is this high degree of selection happening, as we know. Secondly, something that I think also very much emerges from your book, and I find that you so excellently analyze, is this idea that really to understand the current class structure of European societies, and certainly there are still some differences also to be found when we look closer at Eastern European societies, class structures today can only be understood coherently and comprehensively if we also take migration into account. So what we see is the emergence of a migrant service class as a distinct feature of late modern societies. And really, I think this is a key component of our externalization societies. Let me explain that. We actually externalize, and you know that very well because you focus very much on care work, we externalize all this unwanted, precarious, dangerous, dirty, informal labor to the migrant service class. And you just have to look around in sort of the city landscape of Vienna, which I would say is a very rich and affluent city, but you certainly see this class structure depicted in the actual topography of a city like Vienna and in many other cities in Europe actually. For instance, who are the people delivering your food to your doorstep? This is exclusively migrant workers, of course. And of course, our economy and our labor markets heavily depend on this migrant labor, which is, as I said, very dangerous, low paid, etc. And here we also see a gendered division too that comes into play. Very importantly, of course, this migrant and blue-collar labor is necessary because it provides the basis for white-collar middle-class labor and also I would say the rise of a white and native middle class, which is especially true also for the rise of white middle class women to be entering the workforce in white-collar labor, but only because certain labor that is more connected to the household, child caring, care work for the elderly could be externalized to migrant labor. And I think this is a very important also takeaway from all the work you've been doing in this regard. And this really brings me to, on the one hand, the idea of nationalism and how this is propelled by these developments, but also to some of the key contradictions and paradoxes. And perhaps I may just add several more to the ones that you pointed out. Now, of course, we know by the migration scholar James Holyfield already in the 1990s, who pointed out this liberal paradox, right? So the idea that modern, pluralistic, multi-ethnic democracies have to make trade-offs between, as he claimed, the economic interest in openness on the one hand and the domestic political interest in isolation. And so there are two tendencies at the same time, and our modern societies have to navigate these. However, as you so well showed, globalization doesn't only work in one way. It's not only an increase of mobility worldwide, which sort of at first glance you might assume that globalization means more mobility overall, but rather what we see is conflicting tendencies at one. And I'm reminded very much of an excellent book by our German colleague, Steffen Mau, who for this very reason, because of these conflicting tendencies of globalization, calls borders sorting machines. What borders are doing is selecting people, sorting them into categories. So for one part of the world, so to say, and I'm heavily sort of simplifying now, mainly the global north, yes, indeed, globalization overall, for most part of societies, meant being more mobile, having more infrastructure, having passports, being allowed to travel. People in the global north do not even feel borders in the sense that people in other regions of the world might. On the other hand, we do see kind of a conflicting tendency happening that, and I really would like to quote Zygmunt Bauman here, who said that we have sort of the other half of the world, mainly in the global south, of people who are chained to place, as he said, who are immobilized by the events and also by the development of globalization. And this also means that we have a sorting of the population and of people willing to migrate into different categories, those who give an access also to mobility and those who are being immobilized by the very forces of globalization. So these, I think, are some of the very important contradictions that we see. And of course, another key paradox that plays into this whole notion of not only migration and pluralistic migration societies, but also the notion of identity, which is closely connected, of course, to nationalism, is what Chantal Mouffe called the democratic paradox. So the idea that we do see an increasing kind of a discrepancy happening between the population in a given migration society, the one part of the population allowed to vote and being part of the sovereign because they have citizenship of the country they live in, and then another part of the population, an increasing part of the population in many European societies who do not hold citizenship, who are not allowed to vote, but who are very much affected by all the democratic decisions that are being taken by the sovereign, so by the elected parliament. And of course, this paradox and this discrepancy that is opening up, I think has very far-reaching consequences, not only for the state and conceptualization of our democracies, but also for the political party system within these democracies, of course, for election results, and for the governing, really, of everyday life. And now this, finally, and sort of to conclude, leads me to what I would call also the fallacy of the zero-sum game. And this is something that I think, Attila, you sum up so well in your book. And let me just quote, because I find that passage so very important and really pinpoints what you are trying to do and also achieving to do in this book, really. Because you state that in this book there is this key hypothesis of a connection with the polarization of the migration debate and the migration turn. And this is that growing disembeddedness, which means the loss of social security and the security of jobs, increasing market exposure and the decline of non-market related social institutions, that this strengthens the perception of growing competition. I think it's very important that you didn't say it strengthens competition, it strengthens the perception of growing competition. And the emerging insecurity, and I think this is really key in this age of increasing conflict that we have entered, the emerging insecurity that generates a need to protect already obtained resources and rights, and to exclude newcomers, I would even say foreigners, the other, by various measures. So really this idea, and I think this is just heightened now because of an overall increasing sense of a loss of control, of an rapidly changing world, but also this perception that we lose if others gain, or put more radically, natives lose if foreigners gain. Whether this is access to welfare, whether this is voting rights, whether this is residence titles. So I think this perception and this overall also feeling structure that has emerged is very, very important to understand all these different developments we are seeing, such as the rise of nationalism and a growing closing off, perhaps not in policies, but very much also in mentality towards the other, and that is foreign, because that could also mean something that we hold dear to our identity, our homes, is being threatened. So very importantly, and here we really move on, as you can tell, on a sort of more psychological level, I would say, issues of belonging, issues of identity, issues of participation in these increasingly pluralistic migration societies. And of course, Austria, this country here, has been a migration society for decades on end, but it really behaved as if it weren't. And I think that came with its own problems, really, and maybe we can talk about that at some point also, the specific kind of migration rhetoric that we are seeing in the German-speaking countries. I think that would also be worth a separate book, actually, to look at that. But clearly now, in particular interest, as you point out so well, all the many contradictions we also see with regards to Hungary. And it's funny because this guest worker program, I keep mentioning it because I like it very much as an example of the many contradictions we see. On the one hand, of course, Hungary is known for its very, very restrictive asylum policies, either pushing back asylum seekers to Serbia or really just waving them through onwards to Austria, where they then can finally actually make their asylum claim legitimate. So here on the one hand, we see an absolute anti-migration policy as well. But on the other hand, we do see more foreigners, more others, and also more people who look different compared to Hungarians coming to the country by the logic of increased informal and low-paid and low-qualified labor, and all the many issues that come with it. You mentioned really no right to access integration services, no right to family reunification, kind of a segregation discourse and segregation policies that come with it. So I think that together with this kind of sense of increasing loss of control, really, we are seeing these tendencies not only in practice, but also very much in the discourse and in narrative of sealing oneself off, really in an airtight fashion against any contamination from the outside. And this is connected, and again I would like to quote Zygmunt Bauman here, who of course also worked a lot on issues of refugees, migrants and mobility. This is, I think, very much connected, this rise of nationalism, to a search for retrotopia, to a past that never really existed, harking back to something in the national imaginary that never really existed in the first place, but it sort of guarantees you, in the case of Hungary, you mentioned biopolitics, guarantees you high birth rates or the sanctuary of the family, the nuclear family, etc., etc. We know, and you know that better than I do because you are an historian and I'm not, that the nuclear family as such has always been contested, and we've always seen many different forces in society. But this idea that once back in time there used to be this homogeneous society where, you know, we all lived peacefully because there was just this national identity, and now we have to make this country great again because it harks back to something that supposedly have existed, I think really is a very, very strong narrative that we are seeing. So in concluding, I would like to actually conclude with two questions which you do not have to answer right away, right? But maybe just aspects that got me thinking, and I haven't found concrete answers to that because it's really just broad questions or aspects. And I think something that really emerges as a key, maybe even a call to action, academically speaking, but also politically speaking from your book, is the question, what are some political strategies, concrete political strategies that we can adopt to address these tendencies that you described so well in your book? And then the second question, I think you partly answered it, but still, of course, it's really this question that binds all these different strands of analysis together. Can one ever promote the rights of migrants, and especially the rights of vulnerable migrants, without entering into this unholy alliance with marketization forces? I think this is really a key question. As I said, I think you do already provide some answers to that. I thank you so much for this really thrilling talk. As I said, it was even better than the book, and the book already was very good. It was a great honor for me to be allowed to comment on this, and I will spend a lot of time, I think, just recapitulating many of the key hypotheses that you graced us with today. So thank you once again for this exciting talk, and yeah, again, congratulations everyone for organizing this, I think, so important lecture today. Thank you very much, Attila.
Thank you very much, Judith. Time has already advanced, but we promised to have a round for discussion. And that's why I invite you to 3 questions, if there are any questions. And finally, then I'll ask you for the final words. You have 2 questions to answer anyhow. If there are no, there is one question. Yeah. Is there a mic?
First of all, thank you for the talk. And I was wondering about the distinction between the biopolitical hierarchy versus a social hierarchy frustration, because you were talking about this this frustration that arises from feeling like a second-class citizen, and also the anti-LGBTQ narratives, and how this was like a competitive biopolitical hierarchy as opposed to a social one. And I was wondering, like, if you could expand on this distinction.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, so that we take this one, and then Attila.
I guess the question is, do you think that there will be kind of kind of like where will the buck stop with the rhetoric that these right-wing parties put out against migrants, but then also just the, whether if it's not restrictive and if it's just selective, still like an increasing level of migration to Eastern European countries and Central European countries as well. So like, will there be a point at which the far right is no longer able to convince the populace because the migration policies that they're espousing aren't actually the ones that are materially transpiring? And what happens then?
Attila.
Well, thank you very much for the excellent comment and the excellent questions. Even I take some of the comments as partially as a question. And actually, this is related to the problem of strategies as well, as you asked in the beginning. So marketization and asylum seekers. So one of the key things is, and this is what I learned from Lukács as well, namely that this marketization thinking goes into such humanitarian areas as asylum seekers as well. So I was absolutely shocked when in 2014 I could see already papers on how many refugees from Ukraine would come this way and how many would, at that time they still thought about Russia. And then this whole calculation was going on. And then during this horrendous crisis, what we see in Ukraine again, and these unfortunate victims of that conflict, of that war which Russia started on them, once again we could see these calculations going on in terms of labor force and so on and so on. So I think that this is actually one thing which we have to show. This is really an unholy alliance in a lot of ways because it's misleading the strategy. So that's, I think, very important. Second, which we have to state, I was using, so when I was saying that it is not becoming more restrictive, just selective, I was not saying anything good. Actually, I was saying something terrible. Because when I'm saying that there is a lot of symbolic fight in this polarized debate, at the same time, it is very harsh on certain groups. And certain targeted groups suffer a lot because of that, and we have to make this very clear. And of course, all kinds of long-term racist structures operate fantastically in this kind of thing, how to not to see what we see in a lot of ways. So I think that's very important. So one strategy, it would be some kind of a double movement. I think we have to calm down societies in a lot of ways. Stability was very important for Polanyi, and then customary living in the zone. So people have to be assured that their customary living is not in danger. And then as soon as that, then all kinds of competitive feelings and frustrations can disappear. By the way, it's really crystal clear that in societies like the Hungarian society, this competitiveness feeling is very high. We have a lot of surveys which actually show this crystal clearly. Then the next thing, which is very important, this selectivity also means that this attempt to have universal rights concerning this have collapsed completely. And that, I think, is also very important to state. Now, we had this very good question on biopolitical and developmental hierarchies. Now, the two things are not contradicting each other, they are related to each other. So what is a development? So this is the what I call the east-west slope, this hierarchical imaginary of development. And in that sense, one of the strategies, when you see your country as being second class, is trying to look for legitimate ways to counterbalance this developmental perception, and then to claim that take us very seriously in this. Now, any kind of a racist biopolitical discourse can be, quote unquote, I'm not saying, so it is their strategy who are using this, they think that it is good enough. So they can say, we are representing, you know, it's very, I generally call it regressive Europeanization. Oh, it's very good that we represent Europe, which is already gone. I mean, the colonial period Europe, or this kind of a racist Europe in that sense. Or we maintain, you know, normality as opposed to the others, this kind of a diluted West kind of a discourse, and then how the diluted West is to be done. So that, I think, is actually a linkage there. But this makes the whole thing a little bit, you know, once again frightening, because this is some kind of an identitarian competition, very harsh competition, which has no conclusion. I mean, this is not a social project in any sense, which means this is just going to produce more conflicts. What I could see in this data, in this survey data which we did last year, in this Europeanization project, was shocking for me to see how strongly this, not only just propaganda, but how strongly these feelings can be in the public mentality. And then how it is, because very clearly what it was saying, that those people who over-evaluated the developmental level of, let's say, Hungary, they were the ones who were talking like this, right? Because they were not accepting. That, I think, is something very important. In a reverse manner, this is also a problem in terms of the EU integration itself, is that it is unable to handle its internal hierarchies in a lot of ways, and that's also. What is going to happen to right-wing parties in case all these things come up, right? Have I understood this, right? So when they have to face this reality that migration is not stopped, right? Have I understood it? Other right-wing parties will continue, right? So when in my country, Fidesz is attacked because of being pro-migrant, this is done by other right-wing parties as well. So I think who is more consistently anti-migrant, now there is a kind of an open competition in my country. At the moment, I can tell you that the opposition is very much also in that game, in that sense. So something, and this is why I think for me as a sociologist, we have to take this very seriously. So I think we are not dealing with some kind of a minor issue. So I don't hope that just because of, you know, giving the right information, things are going to change. It seems that's not the case, because this right information is just not enough. We need to do something more. Polanyi, in a lot of ways, in case I can conclude with him and the great transformation. Otherwise, thank you very much indeed for the great comments. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you, Attila, for this inspiring lecture and the whole discussion and inputs. Thank you, the audience. Thank you, all the speakers. I especially want to thank Bernhard, who reminded me that Volkshochschule Wien is also one of the co-organizers, and you stressed this. And indeed, this will be the last public lecture in this university, and we plan to have all the following lectures in the spirit of Karl Polanyi at the Volkshochschule, probably at Urania, which is a very nice site for these types of events. So one more clarification at the end. And the final information is the next slide. Yeah, that those interested, there is on Monday this research seminar that Carsten Schneider already mentioned. That's also part of the visiting professorship, to have really a workshop of high-level academics exchange, and but people are invited to participate, and thanks to CEU in Favoriten next Monday. And is there another slide? No? Secret information. There is still something to drink and eat for you, and I think there is sufficient for all of you staying a few minutes and continue the discussion. Thank you very much.